Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us again. As you all know too well, the private aviation charter market has been heavily impacted by the extreme turbulence caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. At the same time, the market has served as an important indicator for the overall state of business aviation. And in this respect, Avinode, the charter marketplace, has provided really important visibility on the state of the market with its forward-looking demand index, which is based on trip requests made all around the world. And today we're joined by Per Marthinsson, who founded Avinode with some of his friends back in 2002, and their mission was to take the charter sector into the digital age. So Per, first of all, thank you for joining us, and please can you just give us some idea of the extent to which the charter market has slowed or changed in the last few months, and perhaps you could say roughly how many people are using your system this week compared with say the same time last year.
Yeah, thank you for having me participating in today's call. It has sure been turbulent times during the last couple of months. And looking at the traffic that we see through the marketplace, and just to make sure everyone understands, we are marketplace B2B brokers and operators around the world where we have a large network. March was all-time high in trip requests for duration of almost a week. Of course, that was very much driven by repatriation flights, people trying to get out of certain areas, a lot of Asia into Europe and into the US. And that was then followed by almost a complete drop-off in activity in April. And now we're starting to see it coming back. There is more forward looking demand. Of course, that's very much tied to different geographic regions. But if we look at April, that was sort of 43% down in trip request versus last year. And we're actually right now, we're only 13% down in May. So rather than speak about how many users, I think it's how many trips are being sourced or being looked through is a probably good indicator. And it has been up and down, and I think there is a case for some optimism coming into the summer months.
That's a really good point, and I suppose it's pretty clear as you look at that fluctuation from March into April and then again into May, it probably follows pretty closely the restrictions that you see in different parts of the world, and of course they're changing almost every day. But nonetheless, does it in a way surprise you that there were still relatively good numbers of trip requests given the sort of extreme situation that most people have never dealt with before in their lives? I mean, I would almost expect people to just say, that's it, I'm not going anywhere, I'm not even thinking about flying. Does that surprise you?
Well, I think it speaks to the nature of the business aviation industry in terms of the flexibility, the agility. Mm-hmm. We saw that in say, March, most demand was for trips in the next 72 hours. Mm-hmm. It was really about getting out of somewhere. We know from speaking with operation brokers that there was a new segment of client that used to only fly commercial that actually got on a private jet the first time. I know operators that had clients asking, it's like, I need to go out of JFK or LAX. Or is there other airports? I mean, people wealthy enough to fly private jet didn't know that there were alternate airports. Yeah. What we're seeing now is more demand being booked for further out. So people are getting to a stage of trying to plan what are they doing. Mm-hmm. And of course, it ties back to the opening. For example, right now we see demand out of Florida up to the Northeast. So people wanting to return to their permanent living rather than the winter residence that they have down here. Mm-hmm. And of course, those peaks coincide with when there is estimated openings for the different parts. So May 1 was some interest, more in May 15th, June 1. Mm-hmm. So there's a pent-out demand and a new customer segment that's looking at the industry, and that's what's driving the interest of flying.
Yeah.
But also realizing it isn't that easy to find a flight.
Yeah.
So just like on commercial, if you need to go somewhere, you're probably searching a lot more right now to figure out which aircraft carrier can you go with. Are they allowed to fly it? So there's a lot of shopping around. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, sometimes trips that sounds great, but you can't do them because of regulation.
So I suppose that might explain, the difference that has always been there between the number of trips requested and the number of trips that actually happen, because there's going to be a separation between those two. And from what you're saying, it's not the case that you had all of these operators around the world just sitting there ready to fly at a moment's notice. They all had to deal with the restrictions, and they couldn't necessarily respond to every request.
Yeah, I mean, the industry is unique in the sense that you have so many different players that everything needs to align. The passenger, where they've traveled the last 14 days, the restrictions by government, the restriction on crew, and in many cases also the restrictions placed on an aircraft by the owner. We saw in the beginning of the crisis a lot of aircraft that disappeared from the charter market because the owner did not want to risk getting the aircraft contaminated. Or the crew quarantined in some strange part of the world, or just affecting the health of the crew. So they said, I will now not chartering it out. Some of those planes are actually now starting to come back. But yes, I've heard stories about everything looking great, and then they have to cancel the trip last minute because some changing regulation or passenger having been in the wrong part of the world in the last 14 days.
Yeah, good point. Now, what has all of this done? What can we say about what this has done to prices in the market? Because there are strange fluctuations between supply and demand, and supply is compromised by these difficulties you've just described.
Yeah, and there is fluctuations geographically and by segment. We see that the super mid-size category in the US, the pricing has dropped a lot. We know that there are some operators that are flying close to direct operating costs. So, of course, that puts a downward pressure on the entire pricing. I know that there are aircraft owners that currently feel it's better to charter an aircraft at those rates than to fly on their own. At the same time, I mean, aircraft that might float in Europe or globally, I mean, floating aircraft, for those that don't know, it's you basically only pay the one way. And there is a hope then that someone else will pay the return leg coming back into Europe or into the US. Those operators right now don't have the demand out there to justify only charging you a one way. They will actually price you the round trip. So, of course, that creates an upward pressure. But it's very regionalized, the fluctuations, cabin fluctuations. And overall, we see the US coming back somewhat stronger than Europe. But that speaks also about just the more simple case of having one country to regulate the airspace with travel restrictions, even though each governor has their own regulations and paths to reopening the economy. It seems to be a little bit slower in Europe as of right now.
And of course, the US has always been an incredibly significant market for charter, more significant than other regions. So not that surprising. Good. Okay. Well, Per, beyond the numbers, how would you say the morale is among charter operators and brokers? I'm sure you and your team speak to people all the time. And, I imagine them sitting there in their offices with all these worries and complications that they're dealing with. But what's their mood, would you say?
Again, it becomes regional. I think in the US, I mean, there is an upward trend, whereas there's some more optimism. The peak period for private jet flying in charter market is really Thanksgiving until Easter in the US, whereas in Europe, it's summer. And that's where we are right about to go into the busy period. So a lot of operators and brokers in Europe are surely hoping, crossing their fingers, that summer will be okay. I don't think anyone expects it to be an all-time high. And of course, every signal from the European Union and UK about finding arrangement to have intra-European travel and tourists will, of course, be valuable for that sector. I know that there are operators out there that say we can survive 2-3 months, but if this continues for 6 months, I mean, we don't have a business. We can't stay afloat. So I'm sure there is worry. We are all optimists. So I think that fingers crossed that it starts opening up in Europe as well, and we see some recovery. The advantages of private aviation has is that once things open up, private aviation can a lot faster adjust and be and considering that the airlines will only operate at a fraction of their capacity, there should be even a more overflow of those that can afford and are willing to travel.
Yeah, good point. And of course, many people are now saying, well, this situation is going to change the whole of aviation in quite fundamental ways. It will change attitudes to airline travel and so on. Being an optimist, it sounds like you see that as a potential opportunity for private aviation, actually, because if it changes the mentality of those who can afford it, it might bring new customers in. Is that roughly how you see it?
Well, I think, I try to find a silver lining on where do we see the industry strengthening. And yes, I think that there will be hesitations about going into large airports, large aircraft, when you have the ability to get on a private jet in a controlled group and a small FBO. I think it's opening up the eyes of those moving from first class into private jets, and also recognize that in some cases it's going to be the only transport method of transport for quite some time. But of course, private aviation supports a lot of business activity. If that business activity slows or is at a very low level, we could see that it's still going to take time for the industry as a whole to recover. But we are still fairly optimistic that private aviation will recover a lot quicker than the commercial part.
Yeah. Okay, good point. Now, of course, a lot of travelers will look at what's happening in the aviation market. They'll hear all this talk about airlines possibly going bankrupt and the turmoil that's happening. As far as I'm aware, at least so far, relatively few private charter operators have disappeared, which is good news. But, do you think consumers might be worried about how they transact business with operators? They might think, well, I don't want to sign up for a flight and then find that the operator's disappeared and my money's gone, or sign up for a jet card and find that I'm exposed. Is that a concern? And I know that you at Avinode, you have a sort of payment system. Can that help to bring stability to this situation?
So to answer the first part, I think there is actually an industry-wide concern about who will be around for doing the flight tomorrow. People aren't confident that if I prepay my flight with an operator, that the operator will be alive tomorrow. In the past, there are operators that would have money on account, brokers that would have money on account with some operators for those instant pop-ups. Operators always want to be prepaid, almost regardless of who's booking it. And right now we're hearing about friction where the brokers do not want to prepay a trip. They might pay half before, half after. At the same time, as an operator, you can't really take the risk of doing a flight and accruing the cost without getting paid. So when this exists in the wholesale community, it's only natural that there are part of that is overflowing into the retail market and the end consumer. And yes, I think that consumer will need to be maybe a little bit more sophisticated in really vetting who they are buying a jet card for. When you give off $250,000 to $1 million, you probably want to make sure that that's money secured and it's not used for other business activity other than when you are withdrawing your flight hours. And we see that payment continues to be a big issue in the industry, and that's why we have Paynode, initially focused on the transactions between operators and brokers and end clients, where credit card came in, but now expanding it into instant payment 24/7, 365. And yes, we do see that we will have an opportunity when you shorten the transaction period and create visibility and confidence about getting paid. That should increase confidence across the value chain. If we don't trust each other and if we can't transact, no one is flying and no one is making money.
And that just makes an already difficult situation harder. So we have to look for that stability. Well, that's good to hear, Per. And I guess really all of us have to be, yes, optimistic, but also patient and watch the situation with the lockdowns and the various complications happening. But it sounds to me as if overall you really have no regrets about the business that you're in, and you still feel that there's a lot of value here to be delivered in the future for this market.
I think that business aviation is a unique industry in terms of its global reach, its ability to adjust. Private aviation has been around for a long time and will continue to. I think that in times such as these, it has a unique opportunity to also support society as a whole. In the beginning of the crisis, I think we all can recall operators flying in humanitarian aid or PPE, also repatriation flights from areas where people got stranded. I mean, that was part of us creating our Avinode Aid initiative. But overall, yes, I do see that this is an industry that will remain strong.
Good.
And something worthwhile investing in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for speaking so openly with us, Per. It's always great to get your expert perspective from the front lines there. And we hope to touch base with you again, hopefully in more normal times in the coming months, I suppose. So good to talk to you, and take care.
Thanks for watching this AIN video. Please like, subscribe, and share it if you've enjoyed it. Also, visit AINonline.com for all the latest on the aviation industry.